One of the most important things we do with our minds is attribute mental states to other people, a faculty that has been variously described as theory of mind, mentalizing, mindsight, mind reading, and the intentional stance. The ability to recognize and interpret the mental activity of others is essential for normal cognition and social development, and deficits in this area contribute to a variety of mental disorders, including autism. But what is the relationship between an awareness of others and an awareness of oneself? Many scientists and philosophers have suggested that the two must be deeply connected. If so, it seems natural that research on theory of mind, abbreviated as TOM, would shed some light on the structure of the self. Unfortunately, however, the model of TOM that researchers generally work with cannot do this. Consider the following text, intended to evoke theory of mind processing in experimental subjects. A burglar who has just robbed a shop is making his getaway. As he is running home, a policeman on his beat sees him drop his glove. He doesn't know the man is a burglar. He just wants to tell him he dropped his glove. But when the policeman shouts out to the burglar, "Hey, you, stop!" the burglar turns around, sees the policeman, and gives himself up. He puts his hands up and admits that he did the break-in at the local shop. Question: why did the burglar do that? The answer is obvious, unless one happens to be a young child or a person suffering from autism. If one can't take the point of view of the burglar in this story, it is impossible to know why he behaved as he did. Experimental stimuli of this kind are central to research on theory of mind, but they have very little to do with our most basic attribution of mindedness to others. Although we use our powers of inference to attribute complex mental states to other people, and the phrase theory of mind captures this, it seems that we make a much more basic attribution first, and perhaps independently. We recognize that other people are or can be aware of us. Explaining the burglar's behavior requires a higher level of cognition than is necessary to merely grasp that one is in the presence of a sentient other. And the feeling that another person can see or hear me is quite distinct from my having any understanding of his beliefs or desires. This more primitive judgment would seem to be theory of mind at its most fundamental. It might also have a deep connection to our sense of self. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre believed that our encounters with other people constitute the primal circumstance of self-formation. On his account, each of us is perpetually in the position of a voyeur who, while gazing upon the object of his lust, suddenly hears the sound of someone stepping up directly behind him. Again and again, we are thrust out of the safety and seclusion of pure subjectivity by the knowledge that we've become objects in the world for others. I believe that Sartre was on to something. The primitive impression that another creature is aware of us seems to be the point at which theory of mind is relevant to the sense of self. If you doubt this, I recommend the following exercise. Go to a public place, select a person at random, and stare at his face until he returns your gaze. To make this more than a pointless provocation, observe the change that occurs in you the moment eye contact is established. What is this feeling that obliges you to immediately look away or to begin speaking? The self-ramifying quality of this form of theory of mind seems indisputable, for without the attribution of awareness to others, you have no sense of being looked at in the first place. There's a difference to be felt here. Being looked at just feels different from not being looked at, and the difference can be described, or so I maintain, as a magnification of the feeling that we call I. It seems undeniable that self-consciousness and this more fundamental theory of mind are closely related. The neurologist V.S. Ramachandran seemed to have been thinking along these lines when he wrote, "It may not be coincidental that you use phrases like self-conscious when you really mean that you are conscious of others being conscious of you." To better appreciate the distinction between fundamental theory of mind and the theory of mind that is current in the scientific literature, consider what happens when we watch a film. The experience of sitting in a darkened theater and seeing people interact with one another on the screen is a social encounter of sorts, but it is one in which we as participants have been perfectly effaced. This very likely explains why most of us find movies and television so compelling. The moment we turn our eyes to the screen, we are in a social situation that our hominid genes could never have foreseen. We can view the actions of others, along with the minutiae of their facial expressions, even to the point of making eye contact with them, without the slightest risk of being observed ourselves. Movies and televisions magically transform the primordial context of face-to-face encounters, in which human beings have always been subjected to harrowing social lessons, allowing us, for the first time, to devote ourselves wholly to the act of observing other people. This is voyeurism of a transcendental kind. Whatever else might be said about the experience of watching a film, it fully dissociates fundamental theory of mind from standard theory of mind. For there is no doubt that we attribute mental states to the actors on the screen. We make all the judgments that the standard theory of mind requires, but this does little to establish our sense of self. Indeed, it is difficult to find a situation in which we feel less self-conscious than when sitting in a darkened theater watching a film, and yet we are contemplating the beliefs, intentions, and desires of other people the entire time. Ramachandran and others have noted that the discovery of mirror neurons offers some support for the idea that the senses of self and other may emerge from the same circuitry in the brain. Some people believe that mirror neurons are also central to our ability to empathize with others, and may even account for the emergence of gestural communication and spoken language. What we do know is that certain neurons increase their firing rate when we perform object-oriented actions with our hands, grasping, manipulating, and communicative or ingestive actions with our mouths. These neurons also fire, albeit less rapidly, whenever we witness the same actions performed by other people. Research on monkeys suggests that these neurons encode the intentions behind an observed action, such as picking up an apple for the purpose of eating it versus merely moving it, rather than the physical movements themselves. In these experiments, a monkey's brain seems to represent the purposeful behavior of others as if it were engaging in this behavior itself. Similar results have been obtained in neuroimaging experiments done on humans. Some scientists believe that mirror neurons provide a physiological basis for the development of imitation and social bonding early in life, and for the understanding of other minds thereafter. And it is certainly suggestive that children with autism appear to have diminished mirror neuron activity in proportion to the severity of their symptoms. As is now widely known, people suffering from autism tend to lack insight into the mental lives of others. Conversely, a longitudinal study of compassion meditation, which produced a significant increase in subjects' empathy over the course of 8 weeks, found increased activity in one of the regions believed to contain mirror neurons. It may be that an awareness of other minds is a necessary condition for an awareness of one's own. Of course, this does not suggest that the feeling we call I will disappear when we are alone. If our knowledge of self and other is truly indivisible, our awareness of others may be internalized early in life. In psychological terms, it certainly seems a plausible way of describing the structure of our subjectivity. All parents have seen their children put their growing powers of speech to use by maintaining running monologues with themselves. These monologues continue throughout life as though they were, in fact, dialogues. The resulting conversation seems both strange and unnecessary. Why should we live in relationship to ourselves, rather than merely as ourselves? Why should I and me be keeping each other company? Imagine that you have lost your sunglasses. You search the house up and down, and finally you spot them lying on a table where you had left them the day before. You promptly think, "There they are," as you make your way across the room to retrieve them. But to whom are you thinking this thought? You may have even uttered the phrase out loud, "There they are." But who needed to be informed in this way? You have already seen them. Is there someone else in your search party? Imagine that you are in a public place and happen to see a stranger locate his own lost sunglasses. He exclaims, as you might, "There they are," and snatches them from the tabletop. A twinge of embarrassment often passes through all parties in such moments. But when the utterance is confined to a short phrase and occasioned by such an innocuous event, the speaker has done nothing out of the ordinary, and bystanders are not yet gripped by fear. Imagine, however, if this person continued to address himself out loud. "Where did you think they were, you idiot? You've been wandering around this building for 10 minutes. Now I'm going to be late for my lunch with Julia, and she's always on time." The man need not speak another word to secure our eternal mistrust of his faculties. And yet the condition of this person is no different from our own. These are precisely the thoughts we might think in the privacy of our minds. We've seen that the sense of self is logically and empirically distinct from many other features of the mind with which it is often conflated. In order to understand it at the level of the brain, therefore, we need to study people who no longer experience it. As we will see, certain practices of meditation are very well suited to research of this kind.